Patapsco State Park used to be one of my favorite places in the entire world. I grew up just outside of Baltimore in a place called Woodlawn. Some of you might recognize that name, but probably not for the best of reasons. I went to Woodlawn High School, same one that Adnan Syed and Hyman Lee went to, and the same one made infamous in the podcast Serial. For those of you not in the know, Serial was probably the first big true crime podcast, and it told the story of how Adnan supposedly murdered Hyman, who was his girlfriend at the time she was killed. It cast a long shadow over Woodlawn, and Baltimore's reputation had been in the toilet ever since The Wire came out during my final year of middle school. I used to love both places, and I spent what's probably an embarrassing amount of time defending both in various online game lobbies. But then came the day when I was no longer able to defend Baltimore or the wider county, and that just so happened to be the day that I decided never to visit Patapsco State Park ever again. My girl and I decided to visit during the summer of 2014, as Patapsco has a ton of different places to camp that came with their own table and fire ring. I'd spent almost my entire life hiking and camping around that park, hence why it was one of my favorite places, and that also meant that I knew the place like the back of my hand. Like how I knew one of the most secluded and picturesque places to hike was between the river and the train tracks. He had this stretch of barely trodden trail right there next to the river, and provided a train didn't roll past every so often, you might think it was a scene from a fairy story or something. Which is obviously why I was so excited on showing my girlfriend at the time, because I figured if I thought it was pretty, she would go absolutely nuts over it, you know? Anyway, we drive out to Patapsco, found ourselves a free campsite, then once we were all set up, we crossed the train tracks and started heading for the river. We're about 10 to 15 minutes into the hike. My girlfriend is absolutely loving the river and was taking all kinds of pictures on her phone when suddenly we heard voices from somewhere on the other side of the water. The river isn't all that wide, but since it was summer and all the trees and bushes were in bloom, we couldn't see who it was until someone suddenly burst out from the bushes and ran into the river. They looked scared, and as they were running, their foot must have caught on a rock or something because they suddenly just splashed down into the water in what looked like a pretty nasty fall. I was about ready to jog up the bank a little to see if the guy was okay and if he wanted any help. But then, right as I was about to take off, he stands up, turns around, and yells out, "No, please no." And the next thing we hear is bang, bang, bang. 3 gunshots. Then the guy fell backwards into the river again. It was all over in a matter of seconds. We heard the voices, saw the guy fall, then he stood up and he was dead. But I swear I don't think his back had even touched the water before my girlfriend and I took off running. The split second we heard those shots, it was just a complete 180. Not in terms of the direction we ran either. Everything was turned on its head. One minute I was the happiest I'd been for many, many months, and the next, we were quite literally running for our lives. I mean, I know it wasn't us getting shot at, but I figured if someone was willing to do that, they probably didn't want any witnesses to it either. I think the thing that really sticks with me was how I didn't run as fast as I could have. The whole time my girlfriend and I were running, I was trying to keep my body between her and the shooter, thinking something like, if anyone was going to get hit, I wanted it to be me and not her. I'm not saying that to sound heroic. It was purely out of instinct. I just remember the skin-crawling sensation that came with it, though. Slowing myself down when I wanted to sprint off through the trees, all while hoping that I didn't get shot, and then hoping that if I did get shot, the bullet wouldn't go through me and hit my girlfriend, too. She was amazing, by the way. She ran like the wind and stayed as quiet as possible, and she didn't even start to slow down until we were safely back across the tracks. Without a shadow of a doubt, those were the most terrifying few minutes of my entire life. If it was just me on my own, or maybe me with like a guy friend, it would have been scary all the same. But with it being my girlfriend with me, for some reason that made it all the more terrifying. I guess there was just that natural instinct to protect her, but at the same time, I knew that if push came to shove, I wouldn't be able to protect her from a guy with a gun, especially if that person wanted to do us harm. The best I could do was try to shield her, and I'm proud of myself for doing that, but it still made for a terrifying few minutes. We ended up getting out of there safely, and we called the cops as soon as we were able, but I don't know anything about the person who got shot. And as far as I know, their killer has never been caught.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Before I start telling this story, I have to say that this happened over 3.5 years ago, when I was between the ages of 15 and 18. All the people in the story have been changed for privacy reasons. I grew up in a pretty good-sized town. High school grades always between 800 and 1,000 students. The town was about 45 minutes to an hour from the second biggest city in the state, which is known for 3 rivers and many bridges. I have 2 older brothers, which means, obviously, I'm the youngest of 3 boys. Our mother was the general manager of my grandpa's golf course. By no means were we well off in any way, but we were far from poor, and our father was in the state police lieutenant at the time of everything happening. Cop Dad was hard on us when needed, but we all 3 learned to always be respectful, no matter what, unless extreme situations call for it. I will say that due to a very dark history, I've never had a close relationship with all of my brothers or parents. Even with all of that, I'll admit this made my dad and I slightly close even for very short periods of time, and that we only had one thing in common, that we protect the ones we love at all costs, even if it meant our lives. Him with my mom and family, and I with my girlfriend and nieces and nephew. When I was 15, I went to the downtown area to get food and ice cream with friends at a place about half a mile from our high school football stadium. Being that we were only 15 years old, going into our 10th grade year of high school and almost 16, we all rode our bikes to meet up. My hometown was split up into 6 wards. The restaurant was 1 to 2 miles away, and I lived in the first ward. And we came back outside to leave to do something else. I realized that my bike was missing. As soon as the group and I checked the immediate area, called my dad knowing that he was home from work, and he flew down to where I was. We all figured that he'd be livid at us, which he wasn't at all. All of my friends got on their bikes to go off in different directions towards their home to look for the bike. As my dad and I were driving towards the part of town we lived in, we saw a group of 3, 2 males, 1 female, walking down the side street toward the streets. We were on 1.5 miles from the restaurant, and the group was pushing my bike as they walked, causing me to snap to attention and say loudly, "They have my bike!" My dad stopped immediately and put the car in park in the street. We jumped out, and I laughed inside due to seeing my dad go from usual to cocked at all. He had the girl and 1 guy stand at the wall with their faces touching it, and he slammed the guy with the bike to the ground. I grabbed the bike and put in the bed of the truck. Since it was only 2 of us against 3, my dad told me to get in the truck so they don't see her face, and I said, "Screw that." And it wasn't until years later that I came to regret that the cops came and arrested all 3 of them. Now fast forward 2.5 years later. I was 18 years old and home for my freshman year of college, which was spent at a military college across the state from home. Which stuff I learned during my time at school will help out. I was out jogging at around 6 p.m. One night on the sidewalk next to the road when a car flew past me, sat at the stop sign until I passed them. Luckily I was close to home and memorized the car's details, or as much as I could. The vehicle drove and went a lot slower than I walked into the house when they were passing. I didn't think anything was wrong with the situation, other than someone driving fast and slowing down upon realizing someone was jogging. Fast forward 1 week, and I just finished up another jog, walked into the house through the front door, which leads right into the kitchen, which has a big window that looks out to the driveway front yard, the street, and stop sign. As soon as I walk through the sink by the window to splash some cold water on my face, I hear a loud boom from outside, sounding Luke Made exploding, then 1 second of silence, then 3 loud booms, and quick succession, which thanks to being a hunter, I knew was gunfire. I dropped down, crawled to the door, grabbed the baseball bat my brother and I used before, and ran out the door. Even though I knew a bat had 0 chances of winning against a firearm, but I was hoping that I'd surprise them. When I got outside, they were driving away, and I recognized the vehicle from a week earlier that sat at the stop sign when I was out jogging. Thankfully, no one was at home at the time, since who knows where they'd been standing or what would happen. After the police came, I gave my statement, and we waited. Since the town was big for a town, it was also small enough that a lot of people knew everyone. The town's police and my brothers all joked with me, asking things like, "Did you try being a hero when no one was around?" Or would ask if I was crazy due to running outside towards gunfire without a gun. What 2 or 3 days had passed when we had received the call from the cops saying that they had caught the guy who shot the house. As it turns out, it was the same guy who stole my bike 2.5 years earlier. After finding that out, my dad and I looked at each other without saying anything. We didn't tell my mom about it being the same guy, and that he had seen me finish up and walk into the house. Luckily by chance, the guy had received 10 years for attempted murder with a weapon, attempted assault, but due to not a single person being injured in any way, no assault charges of any kind were charged towards him. So we went on with our lives, and I became an EMT during college, working on weekends and finished school. When I was 26 years old, I had stopped by my parents' house when I was in the area. I walked into the kitchen, and on the kitchen table was the town's newspaper, which the front page read something along the lines of "Local woman missing, vehicle found abandoned and burned." As I started reading the article for a second, I almost immediately ripped the kitchen table off the frame with rage. The article said the missing woman's boyfriend for some period of the time was the same guy who had stolen my bike and shot at my parents' house with me in the front window. He wasn't arrested or charged with any crime related to the missing woman at the time. I left and went back to my apartment in our way and made sure I was always carrying a pistol, except when I was working on the ambulance. Even through all of the rage that I was feeling, somewhat paranoid thoughts entered my mind. Maybe about him following me. Even if it was still unlikely. My parents left their house for a week to stay at my grandparents' house, which was empty due to him living at the golf course. Life went on from there. I still work as an EMT in the second biggest city in my state. The guy who shot at my house is currently in prison on charges of crimes not related to the murder of the lady in my hometown. It was the day when my boss asked me the most bizarre article to publish about the LGBTQ+ community, since they had always been so private and secretive about themselves. By the way, in my opinion, it was not true. I had seen them being open and oversharing about themselves, but my boss wanted to go undercover and get along with them to get the inner scoop for the article. He did not give me a clear point about what it was that I was supposed to look for. Instead, he just said, "You'll know when you find it." It was frustrating for me to work with him any longer, but since I needed the experience to get a bigger opportunity, I had no other choice. As he instructed, I downloaded Tinder and created a profile for myself. I put my sexual preference on bi and started to wait for the moment when someone gets matched with me. In the meantime, I asked my other gay and lesbian friends some questions about their lives, but whatever answer they gave me did not seem to satisfy me. It was Thursday afternoon when I got matched with a girl named Julie, who had put on her profile that she was a lesbian. As I chatted with her, she told me that she was not satisfied with her sexuality and was thinking of transitioning. I got a strong urge to talk some sense into her and explain to her that she could love her the way she is, but I couldn't because there was a huge possibility it could blow up my cover. So, I played along and tried to act as naturally as I could. She also told me that she had recently accepted herself and broke up with her boyfriend because she no longer felt attracted to him. That is when she felt she was a lesbian. It felt similar to my other gay and trans friends, so I figured not being comfortable in their skin the way we do must be something these people might have in common among themselves. Anyway, she told me she did not want to rush into a relationship so soon, and thinking of taking things slow, which was good for me because that way I could not be feeling too guilty about using her for my article. So we started as friends and continued to engage in chatting daily. I soon found out she was 19 years old and figured she might have made a rash decision by rushing into these sexual identity things. But except for feeling guilty, there was nothing else I could do. There was no way I was going to risk my job over this. You can call me selfish for this, but it was the right thing to do for myself. One evening, my boss called me to inform me that I was taking too much time, and as a result of his impatience, he was transferring the project to someone else. For some reason, I felt a heavy burden getting lifted off my chest because I was tired of deceiving Julie, and I did not want to do that anymore. Now all I needed was to come clean to her, but I did not have enough guts for it, so I simply avoided opening Tinder. 2 weeks later, I got a text from her asking me out on a date, which I agreed to because it was the perfect opportunity for me to tell her everything. We agreed to meet in a cafe in the evening, and she told me she would be wearing a green dress. When I saw the girl introducing herself to me as Julie, I couldn't help but think she looked older than the age she told me. But the way she was talking and holding up the conversation, I was sure it was the same girl I had been chatting with the past few days. She seemed nice and bubbly, so I figured I might be wrong about her age. Hey, want to come with me to see something nice? As we were about to say goodbye to each other, she suggested. I wanted to deny it, but I was already feeling enough guilt about not being able to tell her the truth, so I agreed. She walked me to her car and started talking about her childhood as we got in. As she was driving me to the area which seemed secluded, she started telling me how she murdered her gardener when she was 17. I started panicking and asked her to stop the car, but she turned her head to me and said, "Did you think I believed your story of being from the LGBTQ+ community? Hell, even I am not one of them. I was just looking for prey." Her face seemed so monstrous with that evil smile that it freaked me out completely. "Why are you doing this to me?" I said with my voice trembling as I kept panicking. "Oh no, honey, don't be mistaken. None of this is your fault except matching with me on Tinder. It's just that I love seeing others in pain." As she said that, she took out a gun and pointed it at my head. Guess she figured I was planning to jump off the car, so she did not hesitate once to fire the bullet and injuring my left hand. I let out a loud, painful scream, and in response, she moaned and started laughing, which was even more terrifying. I had to do something if I wanted to get myself out of this messy situation, but I could not figure out what to do. That was when my head stopped working, and I simply started wrestling her to take the gun away from her. As I was already in pain and bleeding, I wasn't going to hold out any longer, so I somehow managed to make her lose the balance of the car. As a result, we got into an accident, but she was a tough one. Even after getting injured, she was still holding up, while I was barely keeping myself conscious in the situation. As my vision faded, I heard someone rushing toward the car, and the fading voice of the girl trying to murder me. "No, sir, everything is fine. I will call an ambulance myself. You don't..." These sentences are followed by a gunshot, and everything went blank after that. When I woke up, I was in an emergency room, and a man was sitting across from me. I turned my head, only to find out that the girl was lying unconscious on the bed next to me. The man told me he was driving past us when he saw the accident, but when he went to help us, the other girl tried to kill him. As she pointed the gun at him, he acted quickly, and the bullet accidentally got fired into her stomach. Even after that, he called the ambulance on us and got us admitted to the emergency room. The police came and got my statement. I ended up telling them everything that had happened the past few days. And as I got discharged, the first thing I did was quit my job, which was the cause of my suffering. One thing I was sure of, though, was that bullet in Julie's stomach was not an accident. That guy intended to do that. After a thorough investigation, it was revealed that Julie had conditions of IED, APD, etc., which were developed at a very young age when she was being forced to live the life of a guy by her parents. She killed them and ended up in a mental hospital. But it was 6 months ago when she ran away from there and started killing people. I felt relieved that I got out of the situation when I did. Otherwise, God knows what might have happened to me.